Good evening, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the board and the members of the Maine Council of Churches. We're so glad that you've joined us tonight. In case you are new to us or we are new to you, the Maine Council of Churches is an organization made up of 7 member denominations and 2 associate member local churches not affiliated with those denominations. And together they represent 438 congregations all across the state who have more than 55,000 members. We are all communities of spiritual practice that are rooted in Hebrew and Christian scripture, and we seek to inspire people to build a culture of justice, compassion, and peace. And though we are ecumenical in our nature, we eagerly seek partnership and to be trusted colleagues with our interfaith partners in the state as well. And that includes our Indigenous siblings who practice Native spirituality that is rooted in a reciprocal and mutual relationship with the earth. Whether you are a person of faith or a person of no faith, you're welcome here. You are welcome in this gathering if you have faith or doubts or both, if you don't practice any faith at all, if you're an Indigenous person, or if you're a descendant of colonizers, of immigrants, or of people who were brought here against their will. As Marty Haugen says in that beautiful hymn, "Come, let us build a house where love can dwell and all can safely live. All are welcome, all are welcome. All are welcome in this place." And as our Indigenous siblings here in Maine would say, Mawapeyene, let us sit together. We are grateful at the Council for those of you who support us with your donations. In fact, we rely on individuals and local churches for 40% of our operating budget. And Megan will put in the chat a link if you would like to donate to help defray the costs of this event tonight. Just know how grateful we are for all of you who support us. Our authors, our guests tonight, are also grateful for those of you who would go to a local bookseller and purchase a copy of their book. They have their own website, which is shown here, and Megan will put the link also in the chat. Shirley Hager let us know that today the paperback edition came to her home. It is here. It was published in hardback last year, but it is now available in paperback. So we encourage you to get a copy for yourself if you haven't already read it. They're also on Facebook. So check out the website. There's a great discussion guide and also a list of other upcoming events where you can hear a number of the co-authors speak. And on Thursday, a number of them will be featured on the show Maine Calling on Maine Public Radio. You can tune in live at 11 a.m. or hear it rebroadcast at 7 p.m. That's this Thursday, February 24th. The author group, a number of the authors from the group that did the gatherings will be featured with Jennifer Rooks. So enough of our commercials. I invite you now to ground yourself, be present, be centered, feel your feet on the floor wherever you might be. Breathe in and breathe out. And as a way to center ourselves and gather ourselves in this digital space, we invite you now to use the chat message to acknowledge the tribes who originally inhabited the land that you're on this evening. And if you don't know who those tribes are, that's okay. Tonight's a chance to learn. There are a number of ways you can do that instantly. There's a phone number on the screen and in the chat that you can text on your smartphone, and instantly you'll get an answer back that lists the tribes who were the original inhabitants of that zip code. Or you can navigate to the website shown on the screen and in the chat and enter either your city and state or your zip code, and you'll get that answer back on your screen. Take a moment to find out, or if you already know, and type it in the chat. If you've never used the chat before, you hover over that little cartoon dialog box that says chat, click on it to open it, type in it, and then hit enter to add your message to the queue so that everyone can see. When you're ready to close the chat, there's a little X in that white box in the middle of your screen that you can click on to close it and remove it from your screen. But before you do that, I invite you in a very prayerful or meditative way, whatever feels right for you, to look at those messages as they scroll into the chat. And as you do that, I'm going to read a short couple of sentences from the introduction to the book that we're here to learn about tonight. This is from page 29. The author writes, "My European culture, I believe, keeps Indigenous peoples invisible in our minds so that we don't have to confront or admit that the place we call home and the resources we benefit from today were taken without remorse from the original inhabitants of this land, and that the impact of this taking lives on in the intergenerational trauma experienced by Indigenous peoples today." I'm going to begin our time together now with a brief land acknowledgement and a prayer or an opportunity for contemplation according to your tradition. As Maria Gerard, a member of the Penobscot Nation and executive director of Wabanaki Reach, has taught so many of us to do, I offer the following land acknowledgement tonight as one small step toward correcting stories and practices that have erased Indigenous peoples' history and culture. May it inspire us to take responsibility, to take action, and to become repairers of the breach. And so I acknowledge to all of you that the land on which the Maine Council of Churches offices sit and the land on which I make my home are part of the territory of the Abenaki and Upisktwo tribes, who lived in right relation with this land for more than 12,000 years before European colonizers arrived, and their Wabanaki descendants live here still. Will you be in a spirit of prayer or contemplation with me now? Great Spirit, as we gather here tonight and in all of our gatherings, help us to listen compassionately, to speak humbly, and to act justly. Grant us vision to see the brokenness of the past. Grant us ears to hear one another's needs for healing in the present. Grant us courage, patience, wisdom, and hope to work together for the future you dream. We offer our gratitude for the Mobiane group, who, through their gatherings and their writing, has embodied this way in the world. Amen. Thanks, everyone. And now, as Megan draws Shirley H. and Shirley B. into the spotlight this evening, let me introduce them to you in a formal way. Shirley Hager is the first that I'll introduce you to this evening. I'm just scrolling to where I can see her and see all of you at the same time. So Shirley H., as I call her, because obviously we have two Shirleys here tonight, is of English, Scottish, and German-Austrian descent. And though she grew up on a North Carolina dairy farm in the segregated South of the 1950s and 1960s, she has made her home in the western foothills of Maine for the past 38 years, where she lives with her husband, Dave. For most of her career, Shirley has been an educator, retiring in 2007 as Associate Extension Professor at the University of Maine. She's a member of the Friends, or the Quaker, Committee on Maine Public Policy, and she chairs its Committee on Tribal-State Relations. Shirley's had a lifelong interest in social justice as well as Indigenous cultures, which led her to serve as the Center for Vision and Policy Coordinator here in Maine. And it was in that capacity that she organized the coming together of Indigenous and non-Native people that you'll be hearing about tonight, what they call the gatherings. And those occurred between 1987 and 1993. And they're the subject of the book of the same title that was published last year, and as I said, has just been released in paperback. So welcome, Shirley Hager. The Reverend Shirley Bowen is of Welsh and Irish descent, and she grew up in the foothills of West Virginia along the Ohio River as part of what she describes as a typical blue-collar family. I've never met any family that's typical blue-collar or otherwise, but those are the words Shirley used to describe her family in the book. She spent the first 24 years of her career working in university student affairs, and it was there that she developed a calling to educate others about the many forms of privilege and oppression. During the last 7 years that she was working at the university, she also attended seminary part-time, and in 2005, she was ordained as an Episcopal priest. After serving a time as a college chaplain and then a parish priest, she became, and she still serves as, the executive director and chaplain of the Seeds of Hope Neighborhood Center here in Biddeford, Maine. It's a nonprofit that fights the root causes of poverty while also serving the needs of those living in poverty. And Shirley and her husband, Peter, live on the southern coast of Maine, where the Saco River joins the Atlantic Ocean. She was one of the participants in the gatherings, and she's also one of the co-authors of the book. So welcome, Shirley and Shirley. And I remind all of you in the audience that if you have questions for our guests tonight, you can post them in the chat. I'm going to set the chat now so that it just is going to be seen by the host and co-hosts. And I'll keep track of those questions and get to as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. But now I would invite Shirley H. and Shirley B. to begin by just telling us a little about what the gatherings were, how they came about, and how you participated. And welcome, both of you tonight. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I suddenly realized I wasn't allowed to unmute myself. Thank you very much. I'm really full of gratitude for the Maine Council of Churches, for Jane, for all your support, for Megan, and for my friend Shirley Bowen to be here tonight with me. It's a real pleasure. Just a little bit of background for folks. 35 years ago, I had an experience that changed my life and changed the course of my life. In 1986, I became involved with an organization that had started up in Maine called the Center for Vision and Policy. Its goal was to bring together people to create a vision for Maine, for the whole Gulf of Maine, actually, the whole bioregion, that would blend together ideas of social, economic, and environmental justice into a model for how we could all live here sustainably. One of their first decisions, a pretty unique decision for the time, was that the voices of the Wabanaki people should be part of this vision. And we set out to find those individuals who might want to be part of this effort. We began a year of seeking out interested Wabanaki to help us think about how to begin. And the result of all these conversations was that the center sponsored a kind of educational forum over a weekend where we invited Wabanaki individuals to speak to a largely non-native group about their history, our shared history, and current issues in their lives. We repeated this forum a second year, but at the end of that event, which I had organized, I was approached by several Wabanaki participants with an invitation. They said, "We think this effort has promise, but we'd like to propose that we meet in a different way." They said, "We'd rather not be up there in front of you as the speakers and you down there, the audience, but rather we propose to meet in a more traditional way, a way that we would be more comfortable in a circle around a fire and including ceremony to help our deliberations." They said, "We'd take care of that. That would be our job. We'd provide the way in which we meet. And your job would be to find the location and get the people there." And it was at that point that everything changed. So I'd ask Shirley, why were you interested in being involved, and what was it like for you and for all of us really being in those circles together once we started meeting that way? Oh, yay.
It kept saying the host muted me, so I couldn't figure out how to undo it. So anyhow, thank you. I became interested because of meeting Ellie Haney, who was a faculty member at the university where I worked and was, you know, one of the spearheads of the Center for Vision and Policy. And she brought someone to our campus, Gisatanemuk, who you'll hear much more about. And I was very compelled by his message on what we as non-Indigenous people needed to hear. And I had done a lot of spiritual programming on the campus, so Ellie and I worked together a lot. So she invited me to come to the gathering and experience it firsthand. And just a quick, for me, the impressions of the gathering over the many times that we met were that it was a group of people coming together very much as equals, very much committed to creating relationship. For me, as someone who worked in a university administration, it was a challenge to not have a schedule, that it flowed. We gathered when we gathered, we ate when we ate, but it was really about spending time together. And then the amazing experience of being in the circle, beginning and ending with ceremony, and learning a new way to listen to each other and to communicate with each other.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to emphasize that we were meeting at the invitation of the Wabanaki, and we were so conscious of and careful about appropriation. In fact, I would for people who were new to the gathering, say they had been invited by one of the participants, if they were non-native, I would spend time with each one of them talking about this issue, and that we were there to really learn and to participate in a respectful way, but to in no way take on what we were being offered. And I described it as if you were invited to a Catholic mass for the first time, you wouldn't feel experienced to go out and conduct a mass. It was with that sort of reverence that we were being invited into someone's sacred space, and we were a guest there. And so that was just a really important message that we tried to convey. Is there anything else, Shirley, that you'd like to say about that, or about the experience of being there?
I think just that, they say that smell is a strong memory producer. And for me, if I smell a campfire and if I smell sweetgrass, it can absolutely take me back to that place. And there's just a peacefulness that surrounds it. And the other is the sound of the drum. My orientation is Celtic spirituality, which also uses drums. And it's a reminder that drums are, they're our heartbeat that we use in different ways. So those are my strong things that I carry with me, that when I get that smell, it takes me back immediately.
And I will just say that these were long 4-day weekends. We would arrive on Thursday afternoon, dragging our tents and sleeping bags and coolers. We looked for someone who had enough land that we could all camp out. And so we arrived on Thursday afternoon and we left on Sunday afternoon. And the weekend was full of our talking circles that had no agenda except to get to know each other, and whatever we spoke from our hearts was what we spoke. And we ate together and cooked together and camped together and hung out in the evenings. And it was just a moment out of time, for us, twice a year that we did this. So I'll just say that the connections that were made in these circles lasted long after the gatherings ended in 1993. We would normally have maybe 25 to 30 people at a gathering. And of course, people came and went over the years. Not everyone attended every one, but there was a core group of us that stayed in touch over the years. We created projects together. We visited in each other's homes. And so in 2008, a couple of events kind of brought some of us together again. And we began to talk about the idea that we felt we had learned some really important lessons, and we wanted to share those lessons with others. And it led us to conceive of writing the book together, to share the lessons that we had learned. It was important to us that there would be an equal number of Native and non-Native co-authors in the book. It was extremely important to me, and I think to others, that everyone would be involved in the book, and that everyone would have full authority, not only over their own words in the book and their own stories, but the book as a whole. And so as I did interviews and transcribed those interviews, those transcriptions went to people. They had full authority to add or delete anything. When those interviews became stories, those went back to people with they had the same authority. And then the book as a whole was signed off on by everyone in the book. We raised money to have planning meetings, to have reunion planning meetings. Shirley, you were at the very first one that we had at Wayne Newell's home.
I was, and there were so many amazing moments in our coming together and having that kind of conversation about how can we translate that experience in a way that people will understand the power of it, understand maybe have the desire to take some of the lessons from it. So it was an amazing coming together. And I'll just share one moment, which was very special to me, which was when we were starting the first night we were there. Wayne Newell is the person who was hosting this particular gathering. And he started us off with a prayer. And then he looked at me. He knew I was an Episcopal priest, and he invited me to say a prayer also. And I have to say that was a very, very powerful experience of him understanding that we were focusing on this relationship, and that generous invitation to have my voice there in addition to his in praying for each other and for our work. And I mean, that's just who Wayne was, and that's what the relationships became, was that really mutual caring and respect.
Yeah, that was a lovely memory. I remember that too. And I'll just say a couple of things that, we feel that the book is pretty unique. Our publisher said that to us. They had a large Indigenous Studies department, but they said what was unique about our book was the story of building relationship over time, the anxieties and the mistakes and the joys and worries and all of those things. People, it was as if we had this unspoken commitment that we would all be as vulnerable as we could be, that we would tell the truth about our experience. And I feel that is what every single person in the book did. They didn't hold back. So it's real. It's our real experience. We represented in the book, we were able to have, in terms of the Wabanaki, we were able to have someone in the book from all 4 of the federally recognized tribes in Maine and the Maritimes, as well as Gisatanamuk, who is Wampanoag. And I also, I think we would say that there's a real diversity of Indigenous voices, that goes against perhaps that stereotype that, all Indigenous people think alike. Well, that's certainly not true any more than it is for non-Native people. And, we have people who grew up in urban settings. We have people who grew up in remote Wabanaki communities. And so, I think it's a fair representation of all of our diversity.
It's an extraordinary thing that you all have created, both in the initial gatherings that you created, but then the book as well. And Shirley B., your description of praying with Wayne is powerful. And Shirley H., you used the word sacred space. So I'm wondering if you two could talk a little. As I read the book, I wrote in the margin at one point, Shirley, meaning Shirley H., Shirley's a Quaker. So this circle gathering, this way of being together must have felt more comfortable to you than, say, someone like me who's Presbyterian, or maybe Shirley B., who's Episcopalian, that maybe you could reflect a little on the intersections and the differences of spiritual and sacred space. And then Shirley B., I know you have a pretty interesting story with Gisatanamuk and his comment to you about liturgy and repetition, but just talk a little about that sacred space and that spiritual dimension.
Well, there were quite a few of the non-native people involved who were Quaker, but by no means all. And there has been a long association connection between Quakers and Indigenous people in New England. And the Quakers in New Brunswick had done a lot of work with Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people there, even before the gathering, certainly. But there are some similarities that create this comfort, with like the comfort of being in that circle and waiting to speak until it's your turn. The reverence for silence, this idea of speaking into the circle that we were instructed in being in the circle, rather than debating or arguing or discussing across the circle, but speaking your truth into the circle, was something that was pretty familiar, at least to New England Quakers. Quakers vary, across the country and in other parts of the world, but there are some similarities. In fact, it's just a paragraph, but I have this lovely little example of something really, really wonderful that happened at one of our gatherings. And it was sort of one of the later gatherings, so we had all been together quite a bit. But I'll just read that if I could.
Please.
During the gatherings, moments of mutuality and exchange let us know that we had come a good distance together. One Sunday morning during a gathering, some of the Quakers decided that they would like to hold a Quaker meeting, and we had never suggested that before. That weekend, we were gathering at the home of a Maliseet elder, and on the land there was a teepee that he had constructed. It seemed that the teepee was the perfect place to hold the meeting, and he offered it. So everyone was invited, and a lot of the native people came. To be sitting in that circle in a Quaker meeting that wasn't very different from the talking circles we had been sitting in, and feeling the respect and reverence from the native people who came, remains a tender memory among many of the non-natives who were present that day. And, I would just say that in terms of the differences, Quakers aren't much for ceremony, or we like to think we're not. And, the ceremonies that we were invited into were such a powerful piece of our experience. And we're careful to say in the book that you don't have to meet in the way that we met to create relationships. We want to give that message. And the way that we met in that ceremonial way was absolutely powerful. And, and that's something Quakers don't have. And I have to say that, there's a part of me that was really envious about that we didn't have more of that. So.
And Episcopalians definitely have it, Shirley B. I mean, I worked for an Episcopal church, so I can say the whole smells and bells thing. But, the fact that very early in our conversation tonight, you talked about smell and memory. And, I think of Cathedral St. John the Divine in New York City and the smell of incense. And I understand what you meant when you talked about sweetgrass and campfires. So we've heard about, for a Quaker, what about for an Episcopalian? What was this experience like for you?
Well, it was an interesting time for me because for a while I went away from the church, and I realized I did what people would call kind of new age stuff. And I got really clear that for me, my faith journey had to be in community, and a lot of the new age stuff was individual. So I decided I needed to go back to my roots and see then from there where it made sense to be. And when I went back into the Episcopal Church, my very first reaction was it's just so rote. It's the liturgy. It's the same prayer every morning starting. So I was just going through all this in my head at one of the gatherings, and Keith Tanamuk and I had a conversation about, I don't know how it started, but I was telling him about this, wondering about the repetitiveness. And he shared that for him, that repetitiveness is what prepared him to be in the sacred space, and that there is a place for that, for the having the things that you know over and over again and use in order to get you to what the particular goal is of a meeting or and that really helped me rethink and actually made me go study the order of the Episcopal service, which eventually led me going to seminary, because it is very clearly intentional why we do what we do in that service, to get us to where we want to be. And so that was just really I appreciated that conversation, that he helped me understand more deeply what my own roots were doing that I just didn't understand.
Wow, amazing. And maybe Shirley H. or both of you could tell us who this Gisatanamuk character really is, because he's so important to this story, not only just to that story you just told us, Shirley B., but to the whole story. Can you tell us a little about him?
Well, I think a lot of people in Maine know Gisatanamuk because he was one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners, one of the 5, this huge effort that took place here in Maine from 2012 to 2015 and is continued through the work of Wabanaki Reach. But back then, when I said in my introduction that we sort of spread, the people in the Center for Vision and Policy kind of spread out to find any Indigenous person that wanted to talk to us about this whole endeavor of creating this vision for the Gulf of Maine. It's not something that people immediately grab onto. It was pretty ethereal, this mission. But it just so happened that I was attending right around that time a gathering of New England, annual gathering of New England Quakers, and it was being held at Amherst. And the Quakers, because it was in Massachusetts, they had asked the Wampanoag community at Mashpee if someone would be willing to do a seminar, a series of talks during the week that this New England gathering was going on Native spirituality. And Gisatanamuk was a young man, fairly young man then, and he had made his way as a young man back to his home community of Mashpee to study with his elders, because he had become radicalized, you might say, out at being at Wounded Knee. And, he had sort of been en route to become an attorney. And this changed his whole life. And he went back home. And so when the community got this invitation, his elder said to him, "I think you're ready." And so he urged Gisatanamuk to accept this invitation to speak to this New England group of Quakers. And so it was his first speaking engagement, public speaking engagement. And so I went, and I just would go up to him after his talks and tell him about this center and this vision. And he was really intrigued because I said that the center wanted a conversation with the people of the land. And he said that he had never heard a non-native person use that term before. And so he gave me some names in Maine and the Maritimes of Wabanaki people that we might contact. But then he sort of took it upon himself to strike up a correspondence with me over the next year, and really sort of took on my education about issues in his community, in Wabanaki communities. It was just, I think he just decided that this group was worth his time. And so through our correspondence, we sort of birthed this idea of having that first gathering that we had. And so that was the beginning. And he was faithful to every single one of the 11 gatherings, traveling sometimes, you know, hours and hours and hours to be there to start the fire, so that it would be going when we arrived, and really teaching all of us how to be around that fire in a respectful, authentic way. And so the gatherings owe much to his commitment and belief in the power. And he has his story, of course, is in the book, and he has some beautiful things to say about how the gatherings transformed him as well. So
I feel in the book, I've never met him. I've never had the honor of meeting him in person, but you meet him as such a young person in the book. And then when I watch things about the Truth and Reconciliation or see pictures of him, I'm like, he's so old. I still think of him as, you know, and I think, well, so am I. It's 35 years
yeah, I was going to say, he's going to see this. He's going to hear you say that.
I think of him as this young guy in a car, you know, driving through the night to get there. And now he's, I think he's a grandfather maybe now.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
So apart from the spiritual dimension, you both have referenced the way of meeting, and you know that you started out one way, but then the Native participants reframed it. And in the book, I think somebody refers to it as the white way of meeting. And Shirley B, I love the way you said, you know, your work in university, you're like, I did not feel comfortable if there was not an agenda. And, you know, you're preaching to this Presbyterian choir over here. Like, we do things decently in order. We have a written agenda and we stick to it. And so can you talk about maybe some of the ways that the non-natives got more comfortable with meeting in a different way than maybe what they were used to?
Shirley, go for that.
Well, this might be morphing into another one, but to me, it's just one of the most important lessons. One of the realities of sitting in a circle with people who don't know each other, but are bringing their best integrity to, and especially for those of us who call ourselves allies, sitting in the circle means being willing to listen to people's pain. And there's a lot of it in Indigenous people. And there's a lot of anger. And one of the gifts that was given to us was the trust to express that anger. And the gift, hopefully, we gave to them was the willingness to sit with that anger, and because it was righteous anger, and to understand that we didn't have to take it on, but we had to hear it, and we had to learn about it, and we had to, I think it made all of us say, what part do I play in this? When you hear the rawness of people's stories, you know, it moves you in a way that I certainly didn't expect. And I think I said this the other day, it reminds me of a Holly Near song where she's singing, actually, because she's sitting with a Vietnam veteran. And in the song, she says, you know, what you're telling me is I'm afraid, but if you lived it, then I must hear it. And, you know, so that was for me one of the more powerful parts of meeting in that way, is understanding my responsibility to listen and listen and listen, and not get defensive, and just be willing to listen. And then in my heart, decide what I need to do as a result of that hearing.
Wow. And you know, this is me projecting a little bit, although there's some of it in the book, how you did that without bringing in all of the fragility and the white guilt that can so easily enter that space. How did you deal with that, or were there times when that was a struggle for some of the non-Native participants, and how did you manage it so that it didn't rip at the fabric of the circle?
Well, I think it's a natural reaction. You know, I had done a lot of work around anti-oppression work and understand how guilt is destructive to building those kind of relationships. But it is a natural reaction because you hear so much pain. And it's just us non-Native people supporting each other in the listening. So some of us processed our own feelings about that with each other. So we didn't dump that on Indigenous people because we didn't want them to try to make us feel better.
Right.
But so we processed with each other that, you know, what it brought up for us. Yeah, so we wouldn't dump it on those who just needed to be heard.
It seems like responsible stewardship, Shirley H., that you all would do that work outside of the circle when it needed to be done.
And I just want to say that, you know, that came with time, that understanding, you know, all that we heard in the circle taught us about that. You know, it wasn't like we all came when, you know, knowing that, because believe me, you know, it was such a learning experience. And I think, you know, maybe we all came with the knowledge to just try to be quiet and listen and learn for as long as we could, but that was about it. Because and you know, and because of I think we at least demonstrated such willingness to learn that even our missteps and mistakes were forgiven, you know, by the Native people, because of course we made them. And you know, but what Shirley says, I think, is so right on. And in the book, Barb Martin, who is a Mi'kmaq woman from New Brunswick, has just such an amazing, powerful piece that we called Humility versus White Guilt. And she talks about that, you know, we can kind of, as non-Native people, when we, you know, if we have good hearts and we start to learn the history, we can just get all twisted up in feelings of guilt. And it just doesn't do anybody any good, because one of the kind of distorted things that can happen is that we can look to Native people to try to absolve us of that guilt. Like, like me, tell me I'm a good person, tell me I'm not like one of those people that, you know, and oh my God, what a burden that can be on someone, and get in the way of a real relationship. And so I love what Barb says about humility is really the place to go for, you know, to realize that, yes, even though we didn't commit those historical atrocities, we still benefit from them. We can't escape that. And so it's being humble about what we've received and starting from where we are and moving forward together, if possible, you know, to do our own work, and also when Native people ask us to be there with them, to show up. And that's what we can do. And then when we do experience, as Shirley was saying, it's a human thing to feel badly about what happened, and to, but we have our own resources. We have other non-Native people who do this work. There's much written about it. And we tried to offer some of those resources in the book to do that work ourselves.
It's such an important point, not to look for absolution. And it is I can see how it would be easy to slip into that. And I resonated with where in the book, maybe it was you, Shirley H., that said, you know, I had to resist that temptation to want to say, I'm not like them, I'm one of the good ones. You know, I think a lot of us who have been in non-white spaces have had that temptation. So thank you for naming it. And it sounds like the Native participants in the circle could speak their truth about how that would make them feel if you did go there. So that there was trust that built up over these meetings that you could, I know there wasn't crosstalk across the circle, but that when somebody spoke their truth, they could name that and explain why that was problematic.
Well, if I could just say, another version of that is putting an Indigenous person on a pedestal and expecting them to have answers to these big, profound questions. And Wayne Newell, who is Passamaquoddy, was just such a wonderful, you know, he says in the book, you know, people would come up to me, especially in the beginning, and they would ask me all these profound questions, but those were the same questions I was trying to find the answers to, you know. And so, you know, and then he says, those weren't the people who stayed. It was an interesting observation that he made, that, you know, if you were coming to look for these answers to those big questions from a Native person, that wasn't what we were there for.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's the other side of the same coin.
Yeah.
So we've talked about two of the men, Wayne and Gisatanamuk, who played such central roles, but when you look at the math of the book anyway, there were 9 women and just 4 men. Was that true of the larger groups that gathered, or was it more balanced?
I surely can speak up, but that was the reality. You know, I would say the proportion in the book represents the proportion in the circles. And I guess we could speculate why that is, but I think, you know, there were a lot of women who were drawn to do the work that we were doing.
And one woman in particular, I noticed that Marvin Ellison put in the chat, mentioned Eleanor Haney. She was not someone I ever was able to meet in person, but the council, the Maine Council of Churches, has benefited from the foundation in her name. And so her name's familiar to me, but could you tell us a little about her tonight? I know Marvin sits on the board of that foundation, so that's probably why he mentioned her, but tell us a little about her.
I know Marvin's name really through, I mean, I've met him, but through Ellie really in those early years. Well, Ellie is no longer with us and has, I can't remember the year she passed away, but it's been a number of years. And but Ellie, the Center for Vision and Policy was really Ellie's brainchild. And she had many brainchildren over the years. The feminist spiritual community in Portland was started by her and her partner, Debbie Layton. And Debbie was, of course, in the book. And but it was really Ellie's vision. And if you've seen the book, you know we dedicate the book to Ellie. And she was a Christian theologian and an educator and a writer. And she just had these visions about how we ought to be living. And so she was the founder of the Center for Vision and Policy.
Pretty extraordinary person.
Yes.
And Gilda is sharing in the chat that today would have been Debbie Layton's 98th birthday.
Yes, I saw that.
Extraordinary. And today is very interesting because it is Tuesday, 2/2/2/2/2. There's all these twos, and a poet, Barry Shepard, who lives in Maine, posted something about perhaps it's appropriate that we honor Desmond Tutu, who just passed on this auspicious day. But let's remember Ellie and Debbie as well. That's really something special. So reminder to all of you, I see some questions coming into the chat. Keep those coming, because in just another minute or so, we'll turn our attention to those. But before we do, could you say a little bit about why the gatherings ended in '93, or how they ended, or what happened? Because it's a pretty interesting story.
You want me to do that, Shirley? Well, the gatherings were happening against a backdrop of a time that there was a lot of cultural appropriation going on. You just saw it everywhere. And I guess, for lack of a better term, a lot of New Age spiritual practices. People were borrowing a lot of indigenous traditions and ceremonies. There was a lot going on, and it was a time that the Wabanaki in Maine, I can speak about Maine maybe a little more than New Brunswick, but we're really becoming so much more, we're really, their voice around these issues was becoming stronger and stronger. And so there was kind of an upswell of awareness among Wabanaki people that these sorts of things were going on. And there was a group of indigenous women who really took on some tough issues and situations to try to stop them. Some practices that were going on in fraternities on the UMaine campus, as I understand. And there was just that was sort of the backdrop. And so we became kind of on their radar, and none of the Wabanaki people involved in this had come to our gatherings. And so we kind of got on their list, you might say, and we did make some overtures with them, but it was just, we didn't connect. And there was a whole series of things that happened that, we just made some mistakes in terms of trying to communicate who we were. And so we were asked sort of secondhand if we would stop the gatherings. And, it was the sort of thing where you can see I'm stumbling over this because it's such a delicate, such a difficult time. But a number of us sort of went into consultation, and we decided that in order to be true to what we professed, which was listening to indigenous people, that if we were being asked to stop meeting, that's what we should do, even if we felt that that what we were doing was not what they thought we were doing. And we all live great distances from one another. So one of the mistakes we made was that a couple of us went to speak with some of these women, but we were all non-native who went to speak with them. It should have been Wabanaki people meeting with them. We were just naive in a certain way about what we were doing, but our one principle was we want to listen to the indigenous people. And so we just made the decision to, as Quakers would say, lay down the gatherings. Yeah. And this was in 1993. And, I remember thinking, well, we've planted seeds, and if we've planted well, they'll sprout up somewhere else. And one of the things that I note in the book is that the Center for Vision and Policy was primarily a white organization. And so there was no way around the fact that this white organization was kind of the umbrella for the gatherings. And I remember thinking, well, maybe the balance needs to be shifted around, and maybe next time it'll be the Wabanaki inviting us. And, in so many ways, I think that's happened. In fact, Alma Brooks, who is one of the co-authors, It wasn't long after that, she was in charge of organizing the Wabanaki Confederacy for a couple of years in a row. And under her organization, they invited non-Native people to join them on their last day of meeting. And that was the first time that that had ever happened. And, you know, and all of the work happening around in Maine that I think probably a lot of you are aware of around trying to amend the Settlement Act that the Wabanaki are subjected to every day of their lives for the last 42 years. It's really the Wabanaki Alliance, which is an alliance of all the tribal leaders coming together and creating this organization to get this legislation passed, and then allies joining them. And, you know, it just feels like the balance is right there. It
does.
So I just have to believe that things have their time, and even if we didn't know what we were doing back then, we did the right thing.
And I do see traces of the seeds or the blooms from what you planted in the way the Alliance works with us. I mean, the Maine Council of Churches is primarily a white organization. And so we've been very careful to learn and follow your example of not just going off on our own and talking about the Tribal Sovereignty Bill or LD 1626, but turning to the Alliance and saying, what do you need us to do? Tell us, you know, listen to them, don't just, yeah. So I am going to turn now, speaking of listening to other voices, look at some of the questions that have come into the chat. Has anyone in the conversations offered a statement or act of forgiveness? Is one of the questions. I assume that would be native toward non-native, but maybe that's me being thick-headed. Has anyone in the conversations offered a statement or act of forgiveness?
I'm not sure what that question is, what they're asking there. I'm sorry.
George, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you want to, and you can say more about that question.
Sure. The subtitle of the book of this seminar indicates a return to the beginning and starting over, or forgiveness. And I'm in the unique position of have one of my bloodlines goes back to full-blood Cherokees. The other bloodline goes back to full-blood Irishmen. So I have one line, I have two lines fighting each other. If in your conversations, did anybody say, please forgive us for what our ancestors have done and for our sins of omission and commission, regardless of which side, whether it's indigenous, you know, lots of history is full of atrocities done by both sides. Does that make sense?
I mean, I don't know, Shirley, I don't know if you have a memory of, I feel that surely something like those words were probably said by non-natives in that circle, in all those circles, all those years. I know that the Quakers are in the process of working on a formal apology from Quakers in New England to the indigenous tribes in New England. That's something that's in process. But in those circles, you know, and I just want to say something about the word Upisktwo, that was something that Mi'kmaq said at one of our planning meetings. And really the emphasis is not really on forgiveness, but the emphasis, you know, she was trying to explain, like, how would you translate this word into English? But what she said was, really, in my language, it means we return to that original place and let's try again. And oh my gosh, when she said that, I can remember, you know, where we were in Dana's living room, where Mi'kmaq was sitting when she said that, and I just wrote it down. And I never forgot it, because it is about returning and trying again, I think. and that we used to have an Penobscot elder who came to our gathering. She's no longer with us, but she used to talk about how you can redo history. And I began to understand, I think she meant literally, like if you recreate, if you go back and just do things differently, you're actually changing history in a certain energetic way. That's the best I can do in terms of how I heard what she said. But I think that's what we have to do. We have to, in some way, return to that original place and try again. Maybe that's what an apology does, if there's action that follows the apology.
I do think that the chapter, How Could It Be Different, gets at this in some ways. And Gisatanamuk says, it isn't like us natives are sitting around building an ark to send all of you non-natives back to where your ancestors came from, because we're not. That isn't what this is about. And you said, Shirley, it's time to explore the idea of being here legitimately, or learning how to live together better in shared space, which is different than, I'm sorry, oh, I forgive you. I'm not being very articulate either, but this is a tough piece of this conversation.
Well, I also think that you can say the words, but you need to live it.
Yeah.
And that's what I think happened at the gatherings is that was our form of apology, was to make the commitment to the relationship, to make the commitment. So I felt like it was a lived reconciliation. Yeah. Of giving time, giving our hearts, giving a real commitment to not let just attending there stand, but to continue to be advocates and to teach people. And to me, that felt like, at least to the Native folks that I talked to, I think that's what they were looking for, is go out and do something, really be an ally.
And to show up and listen, to show up and listen,
Mm-hmm.
to show up and listen. A rabbi was speaking with our development committee the other day, and he said, we sit in our own space and think they should come to us, but what we really need to do is go to their space and show up and be present. And that's what you all did, and put enormous amounts of time and energy. And, you know, people need to understand, you were driving long distances to be together. You were camping, which to me, I'm like, God invented the Hilton for a reason. Who would in their right mind camp? But, you know,
we were younger then.
Holy Lord, I can't imagine. You know, and all I could think of was, where did you go to the bathroom? But that's not an appropriate question for this forum. So, you know, you really showed up. You really showed up, and your Native counterparts, your Native siblings, showed up in ways that must have been a huge risk. I mean, I don't presume to put myself in their shoes, but I worked with a civil rights attorney once who was of Jewish extraction, and not a practicing Jew, but culturally Jew or ethnically Jew. And he would say, it's like I was in Germany in the 30s and someone said, come to this church meeting, because we'd really like to hear your story. How scared would you be to show up? So everyone was taking a risk to be there, and that's really important. So we have, there was a cat asking a question. I wondered, there was a whole string of bees, but it was a cat walking on a computer screen, keyboard. So whatever she wanted to ask us, we can't translate, I'm sorry. We've had a couple of questions about the sovereignty bill that's before our legislature right now, and the Land Settlement Claims Act of 1980. You two can absolutely say anything you'd like to about that. I would encourage people, if you haven't already, to go to the Wabanaki Alliance website, which is just the clearest, easiest to use source of information. It lays everything out in a very understandable way, and it's extraordinarily complicated. The Land Settlement Claims Act is, just when I think I've understood it, I get confused again, but it's a mess and it needs to be fixed. I do know that much. And if either of you have anything to add about the current situation where this bill is being considered, the governor's opposition to it, anything you want to say, but you don't have to if you don't want to.
Well, I will say that the website is wabanakialliance.com, and Jane is absolutely right. If you go there and you click on Take Action, they have talking points. They have ways to talk to your legislators. They have how to write a letter to the editor. I will just say that last Tuesday was the public hearing on this bill, and it's LD 1626. And there were over 1,600 written testimonies in favor, the vast majority in favor of the bill. There were over 100 people who signed up to testify orally for an 8.5-hour public hearing. And people are using the words historic and probably unprecedented in the history of Maine. It was such a large, yes, record-breaking. Yeah. So the public hearing has happened, and there will now be a work session that the Judiciary Committee will hold. There'll probably be multiple work sessions. They are required to report, the committee's required to report out to the full legislature by March 11th. Mm-hmm. So between now and March 11th, the committee will be working on the bill. And then once it leaves there, it will go to the House and Senate for a vote. So what people can be doing now, if you feel called to do it, is to be talking to your legislators, finding out where they are, even if they support the bill, letting them know that you support them. And it's quite likely that there will be, it's probable that it could pass in the legislature right now. It's also probable that the governor will veto it. Mm-hmm. And so the work of the Wabanaki Alliance right now is focused on both encouraging people to let the governor know how you feel, but also to see if we can garner a 2/3 majority to override a veto. And that has to be 2/3 in both the House and Senate. Both.
And that's going to be critically important, I think. So yes, I would encourage you to do that. I would like everyone to know that the 7 member denominations of the council, which is not every church in Maine, it does not represent every denomination in Maine, but of the 7 that are members of us, we had 100% of them submit testimony in support of this bill, along with our 2 associate member churches. And anyone who's spent any time in church world knows it's like herding cats to get us to all agree and be on the same page about anything. This took me one ask, one day, and it was done. There's huge support in our denominations for this. And earlier in the chat, somebody had asked about the doctrine of discovery, and most of the Protestant denominations have now repudiated it. The Roman Catholics have not. So that's what I can report about that. I'm very mindful of the time. We have 2 more minutes, but I could talk to you for a lot longer. I'm sure others would love to hear more, but I do encourage everyone to get the book. It's a wonderful read. And I read it over the holidays, and I just couldn't put it down. It's truly an extraordinary thing you all have created. And we thank you for it. It's a gift to the larger community. And I want to thank both of you, Shirley H. and Shirley B., for your time tonight and for all the work you put into preparing for this evening and sharing your stories with us. Many thanks to Megan Akers, who is our office administrator at the council and our social media expert. And she's been behind the scenes running the tech tonight, and we're grateful to her for that. And I'm so grateful to all of you for showing up and being here with us in this gathering. It is being recorded, and so we will put the video on our YouTube channel in the next few days, so that if you want to watch it again, or if you'd like to share it with others who weren't able to be here in person tonight, that will be available to you. So thank you. I know Megan has put some of that information again in the chat for all of you if you need it. But gosh, thank you. Thank you for all you've done. It's extraordinary. And the seeds you planted are growing, and they'll continue to grow for this to the 7th generation, right? That's the time frame we all need to be looking at. And thank you for that.
Thank you all for coming and sharing this evening with us. And it's nice to see Tom Yule somewhere on
Tom
the
is here.
the
Tom is
screen.
in the house. Yes, he is.
So thank you all. It's been lovely.
And
Thank you so much.
we will let the audience go and enjoy the rest of your evening. If Shirley and Shirley could stay in the room for just a few minutes, that would be great. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Good night.
Good night.